what advice do you have when discussing the question of God and Jesus with non-believing family and friends? Maybe that whole question of how to maybe start a discussion, how to bring God and Jesus into conversations.
I think that those of us who come from non-believing families have to be very, very careful not to come across as pushy. We're naturally enthusiastic about our faith and the way in which our relationship to God has changed our lives, and we want others to find that joy as well. But we need to be very cautious about not being pushy and pushing religious beliefs on them. And so I think we need to be alert to opportunities to say something, to respond to a question or something of that sort without trying to push it on family members. Now, one good way to do that, I think, too, is to be very natural in referring to our faith. For example, one might say, well, when I was at Mass last Sunday, I heard or met someone and so and so, and you've just mentioned something relating to the Christian way in a very natural, offhand way. You're not making a point, but you're just sharing, this is part of my life, and I'm not ashamed to share that part of my life with you. And that kind of very natural sharing, I think, can perhaps open the door to someone who might be ready to hear more.
And just as you were speaking there, Bill, I was thinking about that person when you were 16 who maybe by her example and maybe way of living had an impact with you. Would you like to tell maybe that story?
Yes, I wasn't raised in a believing family myself, though it was a very good and loving home. But when I became a teenager, I began to ask the big questions in life. Who am I? Why am I here? What's the meaning of my existence? And I started to attend church all on my own, looking for answers. But instead of answers, what I found was that the other high school students who claimed to be Christians lived for their real God the rest of the week, which was popularity. And this really bothered me because I thought, I'm so spiritually empty inside, but externally, at least, I'm leading a better life than they are. And they claim to be Christians. They're all just a pack of hypocrites claiming to be something they're not. And so I began to become very alienated and embittered toward the institutional church because of the hypocrisy and phoniness that I saw there. I don't know if you know what this is like, Aidan, but this kind of inner anger and bitterness just eats away at your insides day after day, making every day miserable, another day to get through. And I remember one day I walked into my high school German class and I sat down behind a girl who was one of these types that was always so happy, it just makes you sick. And I tapped her on the shoulder and she turned around and I said to her, Sandy, what are you always so happy about anyway? And she said, it's because I'm saved. And I said, you're what? And she said, I know Jesus Christ as my personal savior. And I said, well, I go to church. And she said, that's not enough, Bill. You've got to have him really living in your heart. And I said to her, well, what would he want to do a thing like that for? And she said, because he loves you, Bill. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I was so filled with anger and bitterness. And she said there was someone who really loved me. And who was it but the God of the universe? And that thought just staggered me. I couldn't take it in. Well, I went home that night and I found a New Testament that had been given to me in the 5th grade by the Gideon Bible Society when they visited our grade school. And for the first time, I opened it and began to read. And I was absolutely captivated by the person of Jesus of Nazareth. There was a wisdom about this man's teaching that I had never encountered before. And especially, there was an authenticity about his life that wasn't characteristic of these people in the local church I was attending. And I knew then I couldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And as I read the New Testament, I realized what my problem was. My own wrongdoing and sin had created a separation spiritually between me and God, so that I was spiritually alienated from God. It was no wonder that God seemed so unreal to me. But the message of the New Testament was that God has sent his Son into the world to pay the penalty for my sin that I deserved, thereby freeing up God's grace to pardon and cleanse me and restore the relationship with God that I was supposed to have. Well, I went through about 6 months of the most intense soul searching that I have ever been through. And at the end of those 6 months, I just came to the end of my rope and one night cried out to God. And I cried out all of the anger and the bitterness that had been building up inside of me. And at the same time, I felt this tremendous infusion of joy, like a balloon being blown up and blown up until it was ready to burst. And I rushed outdoors. It was a warm Midwestern September evening. And as I looked up at the stars, I thought, God, I've come to know God. And that moment changed my whole life, because I had thought enough about this message during those 6 months to realize that if this were really the truth, if it were really the truth, then if I ever became a Christian, I could do nothing less than devote my entire life to spreading this message among mankind, because this is the greatest news ever announced. And so my call to vocational Christian service was simultaneous with my conversion experience.